right, so thank you all again for being here today. Um, we're really excited to tell you about this grant project that we've been working on for a few years now that we've made a lot of headway with this project to digitize, preserve, and make available the Peabody Awards collection. And I am grateful to be joined today by colleagues from the University of Georgia and Library of Congress. My name is Casey Davis Kaufman. I'm the Associate Director of the GBH Archives and Project Manager for the American Archive of Public Broadcasting. So next slide. But before we get started with the presentation, we would like to first acknowledge the lands on which we live and work today and honor the traditional stewards of the land. To recognize the land is an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory you reside on, and a way of honoring the indigenous peoples who have been living and working on the land from time immemorial. It is important to understand the longstanding history that has brought us to reside on the land and to seek to understand our place within that history. Land acknowledgements do not exist in a past tense or historical context. Colonialism is a current, ongoing process, and we need to build our mindfulness of our present participation in colonialism. So I am speaking to you all today from the traditional lands of the Cherokee, Shawnee, and Yuchi peoples. I acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this territory, and I honor with gratitude the land and the people who have stewarded this land over many generations. And I invite all of you to look up whose land you're on at nativeland.ca, and feel free to share that in the chat. Next slide. Okay, so as I said, my name is Casey Davis Kaufman. I work at WGBH and I'm the project manager for the American Archive of Public Broadcasting. Joining me today as my co-speakers are Mary Miller, the Peabody Awards Collection Archivist at University of Georgia, Rachel Curtis, the AAPB Project Coordinator at the Library of Congress, Dr. Ethan Thompson, Professor of Media Arts in the Department of Communication and Media at Texas A&M Corpus Christi, and Ren Marchese, the AAPB Engagement and Use Manager at GBH. And they'll all introduce themselves when they give their presentations. So I'm actually going to hand it over to Mary to kick us off with providing some context on this project. Mary?
Thank you so much, Casey. Hi, everybody. And I want to add my welcome to Casey's. Whether you're joining us live today or you're watching the recording at some other time, thank you for taking the time to learn more about the Peabody Awards, the American Archive of Public Broadcasting, and our NHPRC funded collaboration. Whether you're a media scholar or representing a station who has content in the archives, or if you don't fall into those categories but just want to learn more. In any case, we're really grateful that you've chosen to join us. So we are going to start today with the Peabody Award. Next slide, please. So back in 1939, the National Association of Broadcasters decided to establish an award that would recognize quality radio broadcasting, much as the Pulitzer Prize did for print media. The man who was charged with that task was named Lambden Kay, the station manager of WSB Radio in Atlanta. Now, his continuity editor was a woman named Leslie Smith-Gall, who was an alumna of the University of Georgia's School of Journalism, and she offered to introduce Lambden Kay to John Drury, who was dean of the school. So these two men worked collaboratively to develop the award. The National Association of Broadcasters was happy about that because they thought that partnering with an academic institution would elevate the prestige of the award, an opinion that turns out to definitely have been well-founded. The Board of Regents of the University System of Georgia approved the award in 1940. Now the award was named to honor the recently deceased philanthropist George Foster Peabody, a Georgia native and benefactor of the university. In 1941, the first Peabody Awards were given for radio public service. They honored programs broadcast them in the preceding year. Next slide, please. So from that beginning, Peabody's scope expanded quite quickly. by 1942, we were also giving an awards for news, entertainment, and education. Other categories like children's programs, promotion of international understanding, remember this was right after World War II, and specials were categories that were added. Some of these were later discontinued. Documentary, the most popular category today, was added in 1978. Peabody also broadened its scope to include other types of media. The first television entries were submitted, and the first television winners were honored in 1948. The first web winner was recognized in 2003. At the very beginning, we received about 100 entries. Now we're getting over 1,200 entries a year. Next slide, please. So here are things that you should know about Peabody. Nominees are self-selected. This means that stations, networks, and production companies select and submit their best work each year. So if you're a media scholar, you should keep this in mind. Peabody is in no way an archive of typical radio and television broadcasting. It's an archive of what the creators of those programs thought were their very finest work. So it's a great collection in many ways. All winners are chosen by unanimous vote. The very first Peabody judges included Bennett Cerf, publisher Alfred A. Knopf, and the head of the American Red Cross. Today, the makeup is a little bit different. The Peabody Board of Jurors is comprised of media industry professionals and scholars, critics, and journalists. But the goal is still to be sure that winning programs will reflect the interests of a broad cross-section of audiences rather than just being favorites of media insiders. Next slide, please. Oh, nope, sorry, back up, Rin, or hold still. Thank you. Current practice is to announce that there are 60 finalists, and from those programs, 30 winners are selected. All submissions, whether they're small local productions or million-dollar cable series, are given equal consideration. I can't think of a year when there hasn't been at least one local winner. If you're with a station that's not currently submitting, I hope that you'll reconsider. We are happy to have locally produced entries. So in 1941, one of the stations that received an honorable mention for their submission wrote to UGA asking to have their recording returned. John Drury wrote back to say UGA would return a copy, but, quote, "We have a feeling that in years to come, the recordings will undoubtedly have historical significance and should, therefore, be in the Peabody file of entries." So that is the beginning of the Peabody Awards archive. So if we can move on to the next slide. So what happens after the judging is complete each year, all of the entry materials become part of the Peabody Awards collection. Now, the collection is part of the Walter J. Brown Media Archives. We're one of 3 special collections libraries in the University of Georgia. Next slide, please. So Brown Media is responsible for organizing, describing, preserving, and providing access to the Peabody Awards collection. We have over 80,000 television, radio, and web titles in the collection. Now, these can be public media or commercial media from the United States or from anywhere in the world. Anyone that makes a television program, a radio program, or time-based web media can submit their materials for consideration. So our sister archives and special collections, the Hargret Rare Book and Manuscript Library, curates the over 1,000 linear feet of paper materials, photographs, and artifacts that were submitted to the award. So it's a great constellation of media, not just the programs, but artifacts and documentation that surround them. And thanks to the Peabody entry materials, we know a lot about what we have in our collection. This is not always common with audiovisual archives, so Peabody is especially well documented. And all of this information is searchable anywhere, anytime via our online database. The media is available for on-site research and with copyright permitting, also available online. The Peabody documentation and recordings are used widely in instruction here at the university. All materials are stored in a climate-controlled vault, and this passive preservation does extend the life of materials by protecting them from high heat and high humidity. We're also working to digitally preserve the collection. However, due to the basic constraints of the small staff and only 24 hours in a day, we need to rely on outside funding for large-scale preservation efforts, and we'll talk more about that as the preservation continues. So I mentioned that Peabody materials are used in instruction here at UGA, but student engagement with Peabody has other facets. Then in the next slide, we're going to share with you an excerpt of a documentary about Peabody preservation that was created by Dr. Taylor Miller's Entertainment and Media Studies class last spring. Thank you. If we could move on to that.
Below the red clay on the campus of the University of Georgia lies the third largest broadcasting archives in the country. Part of UGA's special libraries, the Walter J. Brown Media Archives Foundation is the Peabody Awards collection. All the radio, television, and web-based programs submitted to the George Foster Peabody Awards since 1940. Brown Media's archivists and technicians work tirelessly to preserve and provide access to this unique and valuable cultural resource.
The thing that makes Peabody special is the breadth of the collection. Everything that's here is here because the people who made it thought it was the very best work that they did in the year that they produced it, that it was important, and that it was worthy of the award. So Peabody's always been a prestigious award. People send their very best work to us.
So we have collections here that really are unique and only exist here that you might not think would be here. And a lot of this is due to the Peabody Awards collection, where a station may have submitted something for a Peabody Award in 1953, but that station didn't keep a copy of this. And we're able to kind of give copies of those files back to the institutions that submitted them. And if we didn't have a copy here in the Peabody Awards collection, and if someone had not thought to save all those entries over the years, those recordings just would not exist.
Digitization can be quite costly. We do have the equipment to digitize most formats in-house, but because it's such a huge collection and we're in a race against time because the formats are dying and the decks are becoming obsolete, we need to send materials out to a lab if we are going to make any dent in the large body that needs to be digitized.
There are a lot of organizations that think we maybe have 10 to 15 years before digitization of magnetic media is no longer possible. That's due to both the formats degrading, but then also the playback equipment. If we're talking about tapes where the playback device hasn't been manufactured since the early 80s, we're dealing with playback equipment that's 40 years old. It's really a dying art to be able to repair these, and there aren't new ones being made.
And of course, digital is not necessarily permanent. Digital files have to be migrated to other storage formats. The fixity or permanent kind of stability of a video or audio file has to be checked periodically. So there's some work, there's preservation work to be done, even with the born digital files that we have. I mean, preservation is essential for access because if we don't preserve the stuff, it will be dead. And there will be no way to provide access to it in the future.
Thank you. Just to underscore what was so eloquently stated in that video from UGA, this material is in dire need of preservation, and it's imperative that we do so immediately. Back in 2012, which is almost 10 years ago, the Library of Congress issued a National Recording Preservation Plan that stated that many endangered analog formats must be digitized within the next 15 or 20 years before further degradation makes preservation efforts all but impossible. So that was almost 10 years ago. So we are literally in a race against time to preserve magnetic media. Next slide. So in response to this need for preservation, within public media specifically, in 2009, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting established the American Archive of Public Broadcasting, and in 2013 selected the Library of Congress and GBH as its institutional stewards. The AAPB is a digital archive with a website at americanarchive.org, and we have since 2013 been working to digitize and preserve and make publicly accessible historic public media material from all across the country. And this project with University of Georgia was a perfect collaboration where they have the expertise and the collection of the Peabody Awards material, and we are able to provide another preservation repository for it to help with geographic distribution of the material, to make sure that there's a copy preserved in Georgia and a copy preserved with the Library of Congress in DC, and also that we're able to make this collection accessible to the public as much as possible, given the rights restrictions that are out that we're all aware of. So next slide. So the AAPB's mission is to coordinate a national effort to preserve and make accessible historically significant public media material from the past 70 plus years. The Library of Congress is responsible for the long-term preservation of the collection, and the GBH Archives is responsible for access to the collection and outreach to stations and producers and to scholars and the general public. But we share all of the governance responsibilities for long-term stewardship of this initiative. We make decisions collaboratively around policy, collection development, and rights decisions. Not that the Library of Congress needs to be introduced, but the Library of Congress is preserving this collection, and they are our nation's library. And I'm really happy today that Rachel Curtis, my colleague from the Library of Congress, is here to tell us more about what goes into the preservation and at the Library of Congress. So Rachel?
I'm Rachel Curtis. I'm a digital project specialist at the Library of Congress, and I'm also the project coordinator for the AAPB at the library. I work at the National Audio Visual Conservation Center, which is located in Culpeper, Virginia. That's about 70 miles south of DC. And we provide underground storage for the library's extensive collection of audiovisual material. We have over 90 miles of shelving, together with extensive modern facilities for the acquisition, cataloging, preservation of all audiovisual formats, analog and digital. Next slide. As Casey mentioned, the library is the preservation arm of the American Archive. We ensure long-term preservation of all of the files that are taken on through the American Archive project, as well as the analog material we digitize in-house as well. We facilitate access on site to all of the material in the AAPB. That's a little difficult now with COVID, but we do once we're back up and running, you can make an appointment and come to our reading rooms and view any material that's in the AAPB. We also have our own collection of public media, both from NET, which was a pre-PBS material, and PBS, and we're working in-house to digitize our collection. As Casey mentioned, we're sort of in a race against time, so we also do in-house and vendor digitization of our material. Pictured here is our 2-inch NET tape collection, which we're currently working through. Next slide. So a little bit about the sort of the digital preservation. The data center at NAVCC stores all of our digital files on T10KC tapes, although we are looking into a cloud storage system. We currently have over 9 petabytes of storage, and we routinely check the validity of the files. So by verifying the checksums, which is like a fingerprint for the file, if the system detects any change in that fingerprint, then a backup file is retrieved. So whatever has become corrupted is corrected. And we also store everything in 2 geographically separate locations as well. So fingers crossed, everything will be safe for hundreds of years into the future. We also migrate data every 3 to 5 years. And this ensures, again, that everything will be preserved at our facility. And then this is just a slide with some information about our preservation formats. We follow the federal agency's Digital Guidelines Initiative, or FADGI. Our preferred formats are listed here, as well as acceptable formats. Through this project, we are receiving both preservation files for audio and video in our preferred format. But we also work with donors on other AAPB projects to get the best quality file possible so that we can preserve that for posterity. And with that, I'll hand it back to Casey.
Thanks, Rachel. So after about almost 8 years now, the AAPB has preserved more than 116,000 files that were previously residing on magnetic tapes all the way back to 2-inch videotape, if many of you all remember those or may have worked with 2-inch video, all the way up to more recently created content that was created as a digital file. So we've preserved over 116,000 items from over 130 participating public media stations, archives, and independent producers. Nearly 60,000 of these materials are available online to the public at americanarchive.org, and the entire collection is accessible on location at the Library of Congress and GBH when we're not in the middle of a pandemic. But during the pandemic, we have been able to serve researchers who want access to certain materials that's not available online through what we call limited research access. So if someone reaches out to us and wants to access something that's not available online, we can provide them with password protected access to that content for research purposes. And more collections are being added every year. We have been working with a number of stations to submit grant proposals to get their collections digitized, and have been successful, working now with stations in New Mexico and Kansas. I saw Torrin Anderson's on the call, who is the archivist in Kansas, who's working on a CLEAR grant project that we were recently awarded. So we're continually adding collections every year, and we're seeing that more and more people are accessing the collection as well. So there are several ways that, or next slide, please. Some examples of some of the collections we've recently preserved. We've digitized every episode of the PBS NewsHour dating back to the days with Jim Lehrer and Robert McNeil. We're currently in the process of ingesting the entire Sesame Street collection and the Bill Moyers collection. We also worked with KUT. Laura Willis might be on the call to digitize the KUT's In Black America radio series. And we're currently finishing up a project with the Riverside Church in the city of New York to digitize the WRVR FM collection. And as Rachel mentioned earlier, the Library of Congress is the home for the National Educational Television Collection, and we're currently in the process of digitizing the library's NET collection and making that accessible. Next slide. And as I mentioned, we're working on a few regional digitization projects with New Mexico and Kansas. Those were funded, and we just learned that the WIPR Puerto Rico digitization project was funded through another grant from NHPRC, and we're hoping to secure funding to preserve the KVZK American Samoa collection. Hopefully we'll be hearing about that, and we'll be able to tell you more about that soon. Those are just a few examples. Next slide. But we have partner organizations all across the United States, but you do see there are some states where we're missing a dot or multiple dots. And we're working really hard to try to fill in those regional gaps in the collection, and also gaps with regard to communities that have been historically marginalized or underrepresented from the historical narrative. Next slide. One project that we're working on is a collaboration with the University of Alabama. They have a master's program in library and information studies, and they're building out a new audiovisual preservation curriculum within their master's program. It's a distance education master's program. And so you can be located anywhere in the United States, and they have recently launched a new scholarship program that will fund about half of the tuition for the master's degree, making it around a $7,000 master's degree to get a specialization in information science and audiovisual preservation. So the fellows that are working under this scholarship are learning hands-on preservation practices, working at public media stations through the Public Broadcasting Preservation Fellowship, which is the work that they're doing as part of their scholarship program. And we've had fellows work at Center for Public Television and Radio at University of Alabama, Center for Asian American Media, WUNC in North Carolina, GPB, Oklahoma Educational Television, Virginia Public Media, and WSRE. And we also have a new cohort of fellows starting up in fall 2021. They're located in 8 different states. So we actually might be in touch with you soon to try to find placement. And this program, they've got funding to bring in probably about 100 students through the scholarship program. So if you know of anybody who's interested in this area, this field, definitely recommend that you check it out. Next slide. So we also have built out a feature called our digital exhibits to try to provide another access point to topics in the collection around topics or events of historic significance. So as part of the Peabody project, we're actually going to be creating 2 new digital exhibits. One on how Indigenous communities have been represented in public media and the Peabody Awards collection, and another on the history of the Peabody Awards collection. But definitely encourage you to check out the digital exhibits, and we're going to be launching a new exhibit in the next couple of days on the Eyes on the Prize collection, just in time for the rebroadcast. Next slide. And we're also working on educational collaborations and trying to share the AAPB with educators. We have collaborated with National History Day, PBS Learning Media, GBH Education, the American Federation of Teachers, and the National Humanities Center to provide additional access points to the collection to help educators find it and make use of it. Next slide. So getting into a bit more detail about the Peabody Awards collection. It was funded back in 2017 by the National Historical Publications and Records Commission. And the goal of the project is to digitize, preserve, and make accessible about 4,000 programs from the Peabody Awards collection at UGA, every public television and radio program that were locally produced and distributed from 1941 to 1999. And this includes content from over 200 producing stations and producers. Once digitized, the collection is going to be preserved at UGA's Brown Media Archives and at the Library of Congress, and we'll provide access through the American Archive of Public Broadcasting. So again, the entire collection will be accessible for researchers who come to UGA or GBH or the Library of Congress, and we hope to provide access as much as possible online to the public. So many of you are here today from stations that submitted to the Peabody Awards. So you've probably gotten a few emails from us already about the project. One of the goals of the project is to contact every producer of content that submitted to the Peabody Awards, tell them more about the project, and also seek their permission to make these programs accessible in the AAPB's online reading room. Which is accessible within the United States currently for research, educational, and informational purposes. And unless authorized by the station, we don't allow download of the materials in the online reading room. So it's there for people to access for research and educational and lifelong learning purposes. And another major goal of this project that hopefully will be of great benefit to the stations is that once everything is digitized, we plan to, or UGA is planning to, repatriate digital preservation copies back to all of the stations. So you will be hearing more about this from us in the next few months. We're still finishing up with ingesting the final batches of material from our vendor, but the plan is to make sure that stations who want a copy will get a preservation copy of their material. Next slide. So the project outcomes, we're going to be, well, actually, Ren, if you don't mind, if you have a chance, or if someone on our team has a chance to put in the chat, We have just launched the special collection landing page on the AAPB website, which provides some information about the collection. You can also explore the nearly 400 programs from the collection that we've made available so far, and also search the metadata records for other materials that are being digitized that aren't available online. As we said, the collection is going to be accessible to the public for researcher visits at UGA, the Library of Congress, and GBH. And we hope to provide online access as much as possible. So we hope we're answering some questions that some of the stations might have had about the project, and would love to continue conversations beyond this meeting. We're also, as I mentioned earlier, launching 2 digital exhibits by the end of June. One on how Indigenous communities have been represented in public media, and one more generally on the history of the Peabody Awards and the public media material preserved within it. And Ren's going to tell you a bit more about a couple of public events that we're going to be hosting to engage the public in helping us make the collection discoverable. A transcriptathon, and collaborating with Wikipedia DC on a Wikipedia editathon. Next slide. So for the stations that are participating here today in this meeting, I wanted to add this slide to just highlight a bit more what value we see in participating in the AAPB. Public media's mission has been for years to educate, enlighten, and inspire, and that mission doesn't end after a program is broadcast, or after an over-the-top viewing of a program. It's evergreen. That content is evergreen because you have been on the front lines of your history of your local communities for many years, and you've created a historical record of your community and the perspectives and people and places documented within it. So you're able to further your mission by ensuring that your content is preserved long-term. Through participating in the AAPB, copies are preserved long-term at the Library of Congress. We manage the preservation end and the access platforms, so that takes a burden off of your station. Your collection becomes part of a national initiative. So even if you're providing access to your archival material locally through your own website, it has a broader reach once made available through the AAPB. We've seen that scholars are very interested to explore how issues of national importance played out in different localities across the country. And by making material accessible through the AAPB, you're able to help researchers and educators and the general public understand that history better. So also, as I mentioned earlier, we work with stations on grant writing to get funding to digitize your collections. Then we work with you digitization projects to make sure that materials are preserved properly and made available. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're doing crowdsourcing initiatives, engaging the public through transcriptathons and working with Wikipedia. So those are other opportunities to ensure that your collection can be utilized by the public in those ways. And then we can manage licensing on your behalf, or refer licensing inquiries back to your station. So that's 2 different options. Most stations, we always refer them back to the station for any request for reuse. But it is a possibility for maybe not revenue generating, but cost recovery, and making your collection more usable by others. And then finally, there's no cost to participating in the AAPB, which people are very happy to hear. So next slide. The need to preserve this material, again, is imminent. We're here today because journalists like you, those of you who are working at stations, and those who came before you at your station, have been on the front lines of history, documenting decades of social and political movements, people, places, perspectives, and opinions, including many that are still underrepresented or have been historically marginalized from the mainstream narrative. And much of this history, again, is dying on obsolete media, and we don't have long to save it. So we're very honored to be partnering with UGA on this project to ensure that the Peabody Awards collection is preserved, but would love to talk more with you about preserving more of your station's material. So please feel free to get in touch with us. But now I'm very happy to hand it over to Dr. Ethan Thompson to talk from a perspective of a scholar who has been working with this collection. So Ethan?
Thank you. Yeah, so I am here, I guess, to represent those people that benefit from all the hard work that everyone else that has gone before me today do to preserve these materials and to make them accessible. And that's because I research, write about, and especially teach television history. And I'm a professor at Texas A&M Corpus Christi. But several years back, I was lucky enough to spend a semester as a fellow at the University of Georgia, working with the Peabody collection. And my job was basically to watch as much of the Peabody collection as I could, and also put together a symposium of scholars to look at the materials and think about them and what might be done with them. And I really wasn't sure what I was going to find when I got there, but pretty quickly recognized that the great thing about the Peabody collection, as well as the AAPB, is that these are essentially national collections of local programming, because they bring together programs from all over the country. They offer a really important, in many ways, corrective to the ways in which media history, television and radio history both, have typically been told. So it tends to be that media history and writing about media focuses on network programming and national programming. And of course, there's so much more that is in great danger of just disappearing, or when it's produced and preserved, people don't know about it. So I think that the AAPB is just a fantastic resource to help bring people's attention to this stuff. And so happy to see it's there. And I just was going to talk a little bit about the kind of work that can come from these materials, specifically, for example, the book that came out of that project, as well as a series that I'm co-editing with Dr. Jeffrey Jones, the director of the Peabody Awards, which seeks to publish other research that is looking at media history, looking at what's in the archives, to help us think about the past as well as the present. And when people write about present media and they think about American cultural history, of course, they have to have a good contextualization of the historical record. And the problem is, if they're not looking at the local, if they're not looking at public as well as commercial media, you're obviously not getting the whole picture. There's a lot there to be understood. And ultimately, we're not just talking about what American media history is. We're talking about American history, cultural history, what we were. So in this particular project, we were hoping to bring scholars from across the country to just look at various things in the archive and to think about them from different perspectives, to see how they might impact or change the ways that we typically think about media. So, I know that there's a very mixed audience here for this webinar. And so I want to assure those people out there that work so hard or work at these stations and are seeking to preserve their materials. Indeed, there are people out there that want to see it and want to watch it and see value in it. They're here. And for those of you that are watching that are scholars and want to see these things and want to write about them, I also want to assure you that someone wants to publish that work. We want to share that work. And if you're interested in have a project, I hope that we actually end up with someone, more than one, certainly. There's many opportunities and 4,000 hours of public television that's been submitted to Peabody. I certainly can see a number of different book projects coming out of just this particular piece of the puzzle that's being put together. So I was just going to, if you can show the next slide, please. Very quickly, note some of the different chapters that were in this particular book, because again, I think they kind of show us, when we go back and we look at media culture that we've forgotten about, it can help us rethink the present, not just the past. So we had a chapter in our book by Susan Douglas, which was about looking at local television produced in the 1970s and the different examples of gay visibility in that programming and how different that was from the limited amount of coverage that got on network television. Herman Gray looked at a variety of different public television as well as some independent productions that aired on local commercial stations to write about the Black subject in television in the 1960s and 1970s. Heather Hendershot looked at both radio and television locally and across the country to examine the different ways that New York City's Mayor John Lindsay was represented. And then Allison Perlman looked at a variety of different programs produced in conjunction with Ozzie Davis and Ruby Dee to see what kind of consistencies and different kinds of things they were involved with over many years in public television. So there's obviously a lot that are in these different collections, a lot for people to be interested in. And all of you who have spent time with these materials, producing them, preserving them, sharing them, know there's a lot more that's there than just clips that can be used in documentaries or news reports. There are all different kinds of television formats, stories about people and places and ways of thinking about culture that have been forgotten about, but that are there to be seen and can really help us think more about both the present, the past, and the future of media. So I encourage anyone in the audience who's looking to do research on anything to, first of all, go to the American Archive of Public Broadcasting, look at what they have, look at what Peabody has. We're all familiar with, when we hear Peabody, we think about the Peabody Awards and the kind of programs that win those awards. When we think about public television, maybe we think about McNeil Lehrer or Sesame Street. But of course, there's so many other productions that exist and need to be looked at and thought about that can contribute and have contributed to American cultural history, that we ought to spend time looking at those and seeing how much bigger the picture really is. So please reach out to me if you're interested, if you have a research project or a book project, or you're looking to do some research. I'm excited to talk to anybody who's specifically looking at Peabody or elsewhere too about projects that use archival materials. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. So my name is Rin Marchese. I am the Engagement and Use Manager of the American Archive of Public Broadcasting. And like Dr. Thompson, I was invited to this conversation to elaborate on additional audiences who will engage with the collection. And there are two upcoming events that I'll be hosting in March and April that I'd like to tell everybody about. These events are aimed at engaging the public to help make programs in the Peabody Awards collection more searchable and accessible. These are virtual opportunities, and the first one is a Wikipedia editathon. You are likely already familiar with Wikipedia. It's a web-based free encyclopedia based on a model of openly editable content. So during this event, I teach attendees how to create a user account and cite historic programs in the collection on relevant Wikipedia pages. So more about this in a second. And the second event is the Fix It Plus Editathon. The APB has created speech-to-text transcripts of audiovisual materials in the collection and made these transcripts available on Fix It Plus, a crowdsourcing platform to correct simple grammatical errors, and the corrected transcripts are then made available alongside the corresponding record in the APB. This provides valuable keyword searches, which makes it easier for scholars and researchers, students, teachers, and lifelong learners, and future generations to find the content. The Eventbrite link to these events will be included in the follow-up email, and I encourage you to attend, and I encourage you to share the link with your colleagues and volunteer networks. This is a unique opportunity because a lot of you who are on the call, either you have one program or 10 programs, In this collection, it's easier for local folks to attend these, and it'll be easier to knock these programs out of the park. It'll be easier to edit these and make them more accessible. So just quickly, the Wikipedia editathons are based on GLAM, which is Galleries, Libraries, Archives, and Museums. So Wikipedia actually encourages archives to add citations to their historic collections. This helps strengthen Wikipedia articles and helps lessen the gap between preservation efforts and audience awareness, like Dr. Thompson was talking about. And the second event in April is the Wikipedia, or the Editathon, Fix It Plus Editathon. Working off of two screens here. Okay. And like I mentioned, this is a platform online, as you can see in the picture in the background. Anyone can access this at fixitplus.americanarchive.org. And this specific event will focus on the radio programs in the Peabody Awards collection. And the completed transcripts are then added right next to the asset in AAPB so that they are keyword searchable, and you can see the playhead at the beginning of each paragraph so that folks can visit these articles and play right where their keyword search appeared. So I just want to conclude my section by saying that, again, you might have 1 or 10 items in the Peabody collection, but it's really important that you attend these, and so that we can have more eyes on this historical content in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic back to Casey and Mary for the upcoming Q&A.
Thanks to everybody who shared today, and to our audience. We're so glad that you are here. And now you've heard a lot from us. Now we want to hear from you. We are eager to answer any questions that you all might have about anything we have talked about, or about anything that we forgot to talk about. So please type your questions in the chat window.
Mary, I'll go ahead and ask one that was prompted. What rights are you asking for from the participating contributors, or the contributors?
Okay, I'll let Casey answer that.
Yeah, so that is just a standard. You might be familiar with a quick claim, where we're basically asking for permission to the extent that your station owns rights in the program, to allow the AAPB to make it accessible in the AAPB online reading room. So we understand that there might be third-party footage within this program from 1975, and your station didn't maintain release forms. We understand that that you might not own all rights within the program. So we're just asking for permission to the extent that you own rights in the program, and it's like a non-exclusive license. So we're not asking to be the only place where this content is accessible. And we'll put our email addresses at the end, and if you don't have my email address already from an email I've sent already, we hope that this meeting today just is a starting point for conversations to continue talking about making your Peabody material available. So I'll send you an actual copy of the form that you can run by your team.
Okay, so we do have a question. How might we expand on the current project, and what plans do we have for the future? That's a great question. There are a couple of ways, couple of directions we could go with this. We could certainly look at national public radio and public television content from that same period, or we can move forward, because the Peabody Awards is still happening. We had to limit the scope of content for this program to an amount that we could work with over the the period of the grant, which was to be 2 years. And also the grant was not for millions and millions and millions of dollars. We needed to pick an amount of material that we could afford to preserve with the funding that was available to us. So we chose to cut off at 1999, but there's a lot of public media in there from local stations since 1999. And then there's also a lot of national public media from 1940 up through 1999 and beyond. So there's a lot of other content in Peabody that might not be available anymore at the stations. I mean, it seems so obvious to us now, and there are so many aftermarkets and things can live forever online. But even in the year 2000, I don't know that stations were as aware of the opportunities to repurpose they would have, and so things might not have been saved. And then even if the stations do have copies, this is a little bit maybe easier. It's high quality programming that I think everyone would like to see preserved and made accessible. So those are some things we'd like to look at exploring in the future. I know that we've had some questions via email and some conversations with different stations about the repatriation aspect of this. I would like to ask our Brown Media digital archivist, Callie Holmes, if she wouldn't mind chiming in to talk a little bit about the formats that are available. And while she's unmuting, I will say, or to reiterate what Casey said, we're waiting until we have everything back. Rather than sending things out piecemeal. We're waiting until we've heard back from, or that we've received all of the files back, so that we're sure that we have quality controlled copies of everything, and then we'll be able to start sharing back out with the stations.
Yeah, this is Callie here. So we will be able to provide you with one or both two different types of video files. The first is our preservation file, which is a Matroska file in an FFV1 codec. This is losslessly compressed, so you would be getting the entire, no information would be lost in compression. They can be a little bit big, but not as big as uncompressed video or anything like that. The other option is a ProRes 422 HQ file, which would be a little bit smaller, but you do get a little bit of compression in that, even though it still looks very good and is very widely used. But we also have a document that if you just email Mary or Casey, that we can send you with more details about those two file types.
Thank you, Callie. Yes, I'll put my email in the chat. So the best way to do this is for you all to email me. And I'm keeping, if you've already emailed me, I have your email in a folder. And when everything is done, then we'll organize ourselves to send you, to gather and send the files to you.
Any other questions? All right. Well, if any questions come up afterward, our email addresses are going to be at the end.
Actually, I do have a question for the audience. So we are planning on offering, Rin mentioned our upcoming Wikipedia editathon, and I would encourage you all to attend that, because you can always use what you learn there to link other content of yours, whether it's in the AAPB or elsewhere, to Wikipedia. And also, boy, we could use some help with the transcriptive correctathon, because 4,000 hours is a lot of hours. And I have news for you. Your jobs are not in danger from computers just yet, because our speech to text transcripts are not perfect and do need help. And if anyone knows Sandra Gare from Chicago, our computer thinks her name is Soccer Gear. That's just one of the kinds of errors that come up. So we definitely need help with that. But what I want to ask our audience is, for ideas for panels and screenings that we hope to do in May and June. We're still thinking about possible themes. We want to do at least 2 more public events this spring with panel discussions from media scholars or from stations. If there are themes or programs that you would like to hear out of the archives, please suggest those now, or you can email those to me or to Casey, because you have our email addresses in the contact info. And we were asked if we could go back to the highlight, our favorite slide. We've been talking about everything at a big picture level, which is great, but at the heart of it, it's about the programs. And I was just so overjoyed to see KUSC's An Ordinary Guy Burning Down the House, the sound portrait of David Byrne, which was just lovely. Evidently, he is a really, really, really nice guy. And it was just a joy to listen to. And, you know, when that was broadcast in 1989, I wasn't in California, so I never got to hear it. But I care about it as much now as I would have in 1989, and now I get to hear it. And I think that's the real power of this project, is to bring these things back out of the past and give them to us today.
I'd like to invite Miranda and Casey to just quickly summarize their favorite programs so far. There are 2 voices that we haven't heard on this webinar, and they are monumental to this project as well. So I'm going to invite them to speak about their programs.
I can start. So I'm Miranda. I work at GPH. Hi. So my choice was Local Color from Oregon Public Broadcasting. So I'm originally from the Pacific Northwest. And like growing up there, I know that there's like a history of racism and like a history of activism, like in opposition to that racism. But, you know, we don't really talk about that. It's not really part of like the national conversation. So I really like that Local Color actually does delve into that. So that was my choice.
And hi, I'm Casey Carter. I selected the program One-on-One, which was a science radio program that actually won a Peabody Award. And I work with Brown Media, so I'm doing a lot of work with the transcripts. So I worked on the transcription, doing some of the correction for this on our platform, and got to listen to a little bit. And the reason that the Peabody board selected it as a winner was because the way that Faith Middleton talks to the scientists that she interviews is very conversational, and it's very enjoyable, and it's just easy listening while still having a lot of informative facts about what the scientists are experts in. And I agree with the Peabody board and found correcting that a joy.
Before we run out of time, I do want to thank everybody for coming. We will be sending you an email link to the recording of this presentation, and I do hope you'll share it with friends and colleagues. But I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to Nancy Melly, our liaison at the National Historical Publications and Records Commission. She has done a lot of work to keep us on track and make this grant possible. Nancy, thank you. Big shout out. We wouldn't be here without you and your help.
All right. Well, thank you all for taking the hour to be with us today to hear about this project. And if you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with us, or any suggestions for the project. It looks like we got a comment from Winter Shank at archivist at WNET, who is on the AAPB's Stations Advisory Committee. And she's suggesting a panel on how we went about preparing the metadata for this project, which has been a huge undertaking at UGA. So maybe there will be a follow-up to this. All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much. And I hope that you all stay safe and healthy and hopeful. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.
It was a lot of
Thank you
fun.
so much. Oh, good. Thank you for coming.